but to even take that further, to go and say, like, can you not decentralize these systems and make it more energy efficient? And basically, I think at the end of the day, what you would require is much less.
The Philippines today aims to significantly develop its cold chain infrastructure in the next few years. At the same time, however, the increase in energy use and greenhouse gas emissions needs to be mitigated. Wynand Groenewald is an expert in the design and installation of sustainable refrigeration systems. For over a decade, he's worked on projects for major food companies in his home of South Africa, as well as the United States and Australia. In the following interview, we ask him about how a well-designed cold chain system using sustainable technology can help the Philippines achieve both its food security as well as its emissions goals. First of all, good afternoon, Wynand. How are you today?
Hi, Devin. Good, thanks, and you. Thanks for having me.
The concept of cold chain is still, not so clear for a lot of people, and even for me when I was first researching the subject. Just to sort of understand, for increasing food security in the Philippines and creating the cold chain from farm to fork, that involves much more than just cold storage facilities. Is that right? I mean, what else is involved in the cold chain rather than just big cold storage facilities?
Yeah, well, I think it's in the word, cold chain. So it's a chain of events, basically, as you say, leading from farm to fork. So from a fruit or a vegetable being picked or harvested, it needs to maintain in a temperature controlled environment up until it reaches the end consumer, which is the house. Large facilities and large distribution centers or cold storage facilities or processing facilities is only a part of the ultimate cold chain. Definitely, the better your cold chain is around these distribution facilities and these large facilities, the better your product at the end of the day is as well. And the less demand or requirement there is on these big cold storage facilities to take up all the work. So I mean, refrigerated transport, centralized units, close to the farm areas, smaller processing facilities, because also the reduction in, to move something, for instance, from a farm to the other side of a country to be processed, moving it back to be used to where it came from initially is a lot of fuel emissions involved in it, a lot of cold chain that can be broke and your product life will reduce. So basically decentralizing and having a well thought of cold chain really helps the food loss and food security at the end of the day.
And that's actually one of the most important points that we are looking here at in the Cold Chain Innovation Hub is, at this point in the Philippines, the cold chain infrastructure is not yet fully developed. So you're saying that now there's a chance to sort of leapfrog. There's a special opportunity for the Philippines to implement this equipment versus some other countries that maybe be a little bit further along down the line. Is that right?
Definitely. I mean, everybody, developed countries sitting with the problem that they have a large infrastructure that needs to be converted back now, or converted towards naturals and energy efficiency systems that has been built in the last 20, 30 odd years, running in an unsustainable manner. So basically starting with a blank canvas gives you the opportunity to create your cold chain and implement your cold chain on a sustainable manner that you don't need to change it in the next 10, 15, even 5 years from now.
And actually that brings up another point. Food loss is actually a big part of carbon emissions. Can you tell me a little bit about how does food loss impact carbon emissions, and what is the risk of installing cold chain infrastructure to avoid food loss versus having a probable negative impact on the environment?
Yeah, good question. Because there's a middle way, or there's a good way that you need to look at both sides. I mean, you can't say you don't use the energy or you have a reduced carbon emission if you don't have a lot of refrigerated warehouses or facilities operating. So obviously the impact of a facility itself basically comes down to the refrigerant and refrigerant leakages within the facility, and then ultimately, obviously, the power consumption around the facility. There's a lot more at play, but that's the main factors that you can look at leading to greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously, the other side of it is exactly what you state, is developing countries has a much higher percentage of food loss. I think what I've seen is like it's up to 30% of the losses is right at post-harvesting. And like, for instance, fruit and vegetables in a lot of the developing countries, up to 40% of what's been harvested goes to waste. And then you need to look at the emissions that's around that. So that's double the factor. Firstly, it's a lot of resources that has gone into growing that that food that is lost. Secondly, the food that's wasted ferments and rots and puts methane into the puts greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, which is a detrimental and quite a hard impact on the environment. So the impact, it's twofold. The impact of a cold storage facility is high if it's an unsustainable cold storage facility. But the impact that a cold storage facility can have on the improvement of greenhouse gas emissions is also high. Yeah. So if you reduce food waste by having a proper and sustainable cold chain facility that then operates on low power consumption alternative refrigerants like naturals with no greenhouse gas emissions, you basically reduce the overall greenhouse gas emissions quite drastically.
So it sounds like that's really the issue here is balancing the two. Look, we got to solve one problem, but we don't want to create another problem. What is the opportunity here to implement innovative and modern cold chain equipment to kill two birds with one stone, essentially?
Well, I think that's what we touched on in the beginning. It's great to start with a semi-blank canvas. You can really implement this. I mean, you asked the necessity to leapfrog. 20 to 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions related to refrigeration facilities is based just on the refrigerant itself. So immediately that there's a 20 to 30% low-hanging fruit reduction that you immediately can take off by moving towards natural refrigerants. Then implementing sustainable and systems that use smart and innovative ways that doesn't always have to be very complicated in terms of thermal storage and reducing the power consumption of the facility overall. Having energy efficient systems basically reduces the demand and the effect that cold chain has. I mean, if you look at it globally, the demand and the requirement for cold storage facilities is just increasing, and it's going to increase even more over the next 20 to 30 years. So basically, and where we are around the whole Kyoto and Montreal Protocol or the Paris Agreement to not increase our global ambient temperatures, we're already on track to basically almost not make our goals. So that means that we have to implement the cold chain facilities that's required, but it has to, at the end of the day, have similar or even less of an impact than what is currently installed and what is currently operating. So you need to grow it without growing the footprint.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, basically that's what you've been working on, for your whole career is, what is this equipment and how do we reduce energy use and how do we use natural refrigerants and how do we implement thermal storage and integrate renewable energy? I mean, this equipment is already operating today in some of the countries that you've worked in. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, that's the. And that's why I think it's fairly easier at this stage where we are today to adopt these technologies, because it all has been tried, proven, tested. It's available. There's multiple suppliers. There's multiple OEMs, and these technologies are readily available. There's a lot of training globally, and I think the great thing is a lot of people that moved towards this from a manufacturing and an OEM point of view are really supportive of the end users and the contractors going forward. So the training is available, and all these technologies are there to be implemented.
You know, you mentioned earlier Philippines and other developing countries are sort of at a blank slate. If you sort of had like a magic wand, or if you could just, you know, you're always thinking about design. If you had a magic wand, you could just redesign farm to fork sustainable cold chain in a country. What would that look like? If you had all the money in the world, you could just do whatever you want. I mean, what would that look like? The ideal thing.
Well, so I think, to be honest, and that's why, and it keeps on coming back to the blank slate that you have. If I had a blank slate, or to set like, here's a country with no cold chain, let's start and doing it. Let's start doing this cold chain for this country. Basically, I think it comes down to where I ended on the presentation, is everybody looks to think that, okay, cool, how much cooling capacity do we require? I would start even further back than that, where I say there's a need to look at the facility design. I think contractors need today ask, like, or end users, if you go to an end user and say you require a megawatt of cooling, the end user really must go and say, like, are you sure? Like, why can't I do it with 600 kilowatts? Or why can't I do it with half a megawatt? Why a megawatt? Why that much cooling required to do what I need? But to even take that further, to go and say, like, where's your farms? Where's the food required? And literally lay that out. Can you not decentralize these systems and make it more energy efficient? And basically, I think at the end of the day, what you would require is much less, because you have a 4 megawatt facility that is maybe at 60% capacity on average throughout the year, where you can have that facilities broken up into 20 smaller facilities that's at 100% capacity the whole year. And you can take those small facilities off the grid. It's closer to where it is, the product at the end of the day is actually required. So you don't need a lot of transport around it. There's jobs that you can create around it. And then literally, I guess it's like, how do you not waste cooling? So basically, I would really look at the facility, is instead of saying, like, how can we make this facility as cheap as possible, look at how can we make it as it needs to be like a capsule. It needs to really look at, if you're gonna waste 1 kilowatt of cooling because it goes out the door, or it seeps through somewhere, or it radiates out, that's energy wasted. That's the goal is to maintain your food and to have sustainable food, to reduce your food wastage. If any power that goes into that's not required to keep your food at the temperatures and the longevity that it is a waste. So I would literally bring it back from that side. I think I would even start there, to go and say, like, it must be a grid. Like, if you're going to develop a city, you're going to look at you're probably going to look at your power supply to the city. You're going to look at your sewage, your water, and that all needs to, where is your sewage plant going to be? It needs to be strategic somewhere. And where is smaller plants going to be to take care of all your sewage? The same approach can be taken with cold chain. Where do I need a hub? And does that hub need to be X amount big? Or can I make it half the size and have smaller hubs all around it? Yeah, basically.
I mean, it's just questioning the most basic assumptions, I guess. And there's really an opportunity here to do that. And then this has an impact on so many different stakeholders, from agriculture to the agribusiness, to government, to emissions, to people eating their food at home.
Yeah.
Thanks again for taking the time, and we'll see you. We'll hopefully talk to you again soon.
Thanks. You too. We'll see you just now.
If you'd like to learn more about the Cold Chain Innovation Hub project and our global partnership to help improve the food cold chain in the Philippines, please check out our website at cci-hub.org. You can also reach out to us directly or subscribe to our email newsletter by clicking on the link below to stay up to date on the project's latest developments.